Her faithful old dog disappeared one day, and the heart-wrenching reason left everyone in tears. The morning Margaret Wilson realized Max was missing started like any other February day in Millbrook, Massachusetts. The silver-haired woman of 72 had risen at her usual time of 6:30 a.m., her joints protesting the cold as she made her way downstairs. Max, her elderly golden retriever, hadn't been in his usual spot at the foot of her bed, but she hadn't worried then. Sometimes he preferred the cooler air of the kitchen on winter nights. But when she reached the kitchen, his water bowl sat untouched from the night before. The morning light streaming through the window revealed no furry form sprawled on the time-worn linoleum. A quick check of the living room showed his favorite spot by the fireplace empty, the indent in his bed the only evidence of his presence. "Max!" Her voice echoed through the silent house, bouncing off walls filled with photographs chronicling a life well lived. There was her wedding photo with Robert, her late husband of 45 years, their children's graduation pictures, grandchildren's birthdays, and scattered among them all images of Max, from his puppy days to his distinguished gray-muzzled present. The back door was securely locked, just as she'd left it the night before. The gate in the fence showed no signs of tampering. Even the snow in the backyard remained unmarked by paw prints. It was as if Max had simply vanished into thin air. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for the phone, dialing her daughter Laura's number in Connecticut. The call went to voicemail. Of course. It was barely 7 a.m., and Laura would be getting the kids ready for school. "Laura, honey, it's Mom. Could you call me when you get a chance? It's about Max." She tried to keep the worry from her voice, not wanting to alarm her daughter unnecessarily. After all, Max had to be somewhere. The next call was to the local police department, where she spoke with Sergeant Mike O'Malley, who'd known her and Robert for decades. "Now, Margaret, when did you last see him?" Mike's familiar Boston accent carried a note of concern. "Last night, around 9. He was in his bed when I went upstairs to read. But this morning..." Her voice caught. "Mike, he's 13 years old. He can barely make it around the block these days without getting tired. He wouldn't just wander off." "I'll put the word out to our patrols," Mike assured her. "And I'll call animal control first thing when they open. Try not to worry too much. Max is pretty recognizable around town." But worry she did. As the morning wore on, Margaret methodically searched every room in the house, even checking unlikely spots like the basement and the rarely used guest room. She called every neighbor on the street, each conversation ending with promises to keep an eye out and check garages and sheds. By noon, Laura called back, her voice tight with concern. "Mom, I can be there in 3 hours. Let me just arrange for Tom's sister to pick up the kids from school." "Don't be silly," Margaret protested, though her heart ached for her daughter's presence. "It's probably nothing. He has to be somewhere nearby. You know how dogs are. Sometimes they just need a little adventure." But Max wasn't the adventuring type, and they both knew it. He had been Robert and Margaret's last anniversary gift to each other, chosen specifically for his calm, gentle temperament. Even as a puppy, he'd been more interested in cuddling than causing mischief. When Robert was diagnosed with cancer 6 years ago, Max had appointed himself chief comforter, barely leaving their side through months of treatments and hospital visits. After Robert passed, Max had transferred all his devotion to Margaret. He seemed to sense when her grief threatened to overwhelm her, pressing his warm body against her legs or resting his head in her lap until the waves of sadness passed. He got her out of bed each morning when she might have preferred to stay buried under the covers, insisted on his walks even on her darkest days, and provided a reason to keep going when the silence of the house threatened to swallow her whole. By late afternoon, the entire neighborhood was involved in the search. Grace Chen, Margaret's next-door neighbor of 30 years, coordinated a phone tree while her husband Frank posted flyers at local businesses. The Patels from across the street drove the surrounding neighborhoods, calling Max's name out their car windows. Even Mrs. O'Leary, who normally complained about everything from children's laughter to the sound of lawnmowers, joined the search, wielding her cane like a walking stick as she peered into bushes and behind fences. As darkness fell and temperatures dropped, Margaret stood at her kitchen window, watching snowflakes dance in the beam of the porch light. The weather forecast predicted record low temperatures overnight. The thought of Max out there somewhere, cold and alone, made her chest tight with anxiety. Grace came over with a pot of chicken soup and insisted on staying until Margaret ate at least a bowl. "You need to keep up your strength," she said firmly. Her Asian features creased with concern. "Max wouldn't want you making yourself sick with worry." That night, Margaret barely slept. Every sound made her heart leap. Was that a scratch at the door? A whimper in the yard? But each time she checked, she found only empty darkness and swirling snow. The next few days fell into a pattern. Margaret would wake early, hope blooming anew each morning, only to wither as she found Max's bed still empty. She walked the neighborhoods until her arthritic knees screamed in protest, posted updates on social media, called shelters, and checked in with animal control. Her children called several times a day, their worry for both their mother and the dog evident in their voices. It was her granddaughter Sarah who first suggested setting up trail cameras in the backyard. "We used them at science camp last summer, Grandma," the 11-year-old explained over FaceTime. "They take pictures whenever something moves. If Max comes home during the night, we'll know." Tom, Laura's husband, drove up that weekend to install the cameras and help with the search. He also insisted on checking Margaret's fence line and gates, looking for any possible escape route. But everything was secure, adding to the mystery of Max's disappearance. As days turned into weeks, the initial flurry of community activity settled into a quieter, steady vigilance. People still called with potential sightings, but none of them panned out. The local paper ran a story about Max, complete with a recent photo of him wearing the red bandana Margaret had given him for Christmas. The article mentioned his age and medical needs. He took daily arthritis medication and was on a special senior dog diet. Margaret tried to maintain her normal routine, but everything felt wrong without Max. There was no one to share her morning toast with, no warm body leaning against her legs as she watched the evening news, no rhythmic breathing to lull her to sleep at night. The house felt impossibly large and empty, filled with echoes of happiness that now seemed to mock her solitude. It was during this time that Margaret began to notice things she'd overlooked before, like how many of her neighbors regularly checked on her, bringing food or just stopping by to chat. How the local children would pause their games to ask if she'd found Max yet, their young faces bright with concern and hope. How even strangers would stop her in the grocery store, recognizing her from the newspaper article, to offer words of encouragement or share stories of their own lost pets who had eventually found their way home. The community's kindness was a balm to her worried heart, but it also stirred memories that made the ache of Max's absence even sharper. She remembered how Max had been there through all the major changes in their lives over the past 13 years. He'd welcomed grandchildren, comforted them through losses, celebrated achievements, and provided unwavering support through life's ups and downs. One particular memory kept surfacing, of a young boy named Tommy Miller, who used to visit during his cancer treatments. Tommy had been the same age as Sarah when he was diagnosed with leukemia, and something about Max had drawn him like a magnet. During his worst days of chemotherapy, when even his own family's touch caused him pain, Tommy would sit for hours in Margaret's garden with Max's head in his lap. The Millers had moved away 2 years ago to be closer to a specialized treatment center, and Margaret had lost touch after Robert's passing. She wondered sometimes about Tommy, hoping he had beaten the odds that had seemed stacked against him. It was on the 12th day of Max's disappearance that everything changed. Margaret had just returned from another futile search when she noticed a familiar car in her driveway, Dr. Sarah Martinez's veterinary vehicle. The sight made her heart skip a beat. Had something happened? Had someone found Max? Dr. Martinez was waiting on the porch, her expression serious but gentle. She'd been Max's vet for the past decade, treating everything from puppy vaccines to his current arthritis issues. More than that, she'd become a friend, someone who understood the deep bond between Margaret and her dog. "Margaret," she called out, "we need to talk. I think I know what happened to Max." Inside, over cups of tea that grew cold and untouched, Dr. Martinez shared a story that would forever change Margaret's understanding of her beloved companion. "Do you remember Karen?" one of our vet techs. She was driving home late from an emergency shift about 2 weeks ago, just before Max disappeared. She saw him walking along Cedar Street, near the old Miller farm. Margaret's hands clutched her teacup. But that's over 3 miles away. And at night, why wouldn't she stop? She tried, Dr. Martinez explained. She said she pulled over and called to him, but he seemed determined, like he had somewhere specific to be. She followed him for a bit, but then lost sight of him when he turned onto the farm property. She meant to tell me sooner, but with the emergency cases we've had lately, she paused, choosing her next words carefully. Margaret, have you heard about Tommy Miller? The name sent a jolt through Margaret's heart. Not since they moved away. Is he? Dr. Martinez reached across the table to take Margaret's hand. He passed away last month, Margaret. His parents moved back to care for his grandmother, who still lives in the farmhouse. They were moving his things in the night Max disappeared. The revelation hit Margaret like a physical blow. But how could Max have known? Dogs have abilities we're only beginning to understand, Dr. Martinez said softly. Their sense of smell is extraordinary. They can detect changes in body chemistry, emotions, even illness, and their emotional intelligence. Well, sometimes it seems almost supernatural. We think Max somehow sensed the Miller's return and remembered Tommy. But where is he now? Margaret's voice cracked with fresh worry. That's why I'm here. Mrs. Miller called the clinic yesterday. They found Max in Tommy's old room, curled up with one of his blankets. He's been there for days, refusing to eat or move. They didn't know he was missing. Assumed you must have moved away too. Dr. Martinez squeezed Margaret's hand. He's alive but weak. We have him at the clinic now on 4 fluids. But he needs you, Margaret. I think he needed to say goodbye to Tommy in his own way, and now he needs to know it's okay to come home. The drive to the veterinary clinic passed in a blur. Margaret's mind was filled with memories. Tommy sitting in her garden with Max, his bald head protected from the sun by a baseball cap, his thin fingers gently stroking Max's golden fur while he talked about everything and nothing. How Max would lie perfectly still, even when Tommy's treatments left him too weak to do more than whisper, as if he understood exactly what the boy needed. The sight of Max in the clinic's treatment room nearly broke Margaret's heart. He lay on a blanket, looking smaller and older than she remembered, and 4 line running into his front leg. But when he saw her, his tail thumped weakly against the floor, and his eyes, those soulful brown eyes that had seen her through so many of life's challenges, filled with recognition and love. "Oh, Max," she whispered, kneeling beside him despite her protesting knees. "My brave, faithful boy." Over the next few days, as Max slowly regained his strength, the Millers came to visit. They brought Tommy's favorite blanket, the one Max had chosen to curl up with, and a photo album Margaret had never seen. In it were dozens of pictures of Tommy with Max, playing in the garden, reading books together, even one taken at the hospital where Max had visited as part of a therapy dog program. Tommy talked about Max until the end, Mrs. Miller shared, her eyes bright with tears. He said Max was his guardian angel, that when everything hurt and he was scared, Max knew exactly how to make him feel safe. She pulled out one final photograph, taken just weeks before they'd moved away. In it, Tommy was sitting in Margaret's garden, his head bald from chemotherapy but his smile radiant as he hugged Max. He wanted Max to have this. Said it was so he'd remember their special place. The story of Max's journey spread through the community like ripples in a pond, touching hearts and bringing people together in unexpected ways. The local paper ran a follow-up article about the extraordinary bond between humans and animals, featuring Max's mysterious pilgrimage to comfort a departed friend. Letters poured in from people sharing their own stories of animal companions who seemed to understand more than anyone could explain. That spring, something beautiful grew from their story. The children's ward at the local hospital established a therapy dog program in Tommy's memory, with Max as the inspiration. Though too old to participate himself, Max attended the dedication ceremony, wearing a special bandana embroidered with Tommy's angels. Children gathered around him, their eyes wide with wonder as their parents explained his story. Even in his elderly state, Max seemed to know exactly which children needed him most, gently resting his head in their laps or offering a paw to hold. The program grew beyond anyone's expectations. Dogs and their handlers visited not just the children's ward but the entire hospital, bringing comfort to patients, families, and staff alike. Research studies began documenting the positive effects on recovery rates and emotional well-being. Medical students at nearby universities started including animal-assisted therapy in their studies of holistic patient care. Max lived 2 more years after his journey to Tommy's room. He grew slower and whiter around the muzzle, but his gentle spirit never dimmed. On warm days, he would lie in the garden where he used to sit with Tommy. His eyes closed in contentment as Margaret read or gardened nearby. Sometimes, she would catch him looking at something she couldn't see, his tail wagging softly, and she would wonder if he was remembering his young friend. The Millers became regular visitors, bringing updates about the therapy dog program and sharing memories of Tommy. Their grief, like Margaret's own grief for Robert, slowly transformed into a softer kind of sadness, tempered by gratitude for the love they had known. They worked together to establish a scholarship fund for young people interested in veterinary medicine or animal-assisted therapy, ensuring that Tommy and Max's legacy would continue to touch lives. When Max's time finally came, it was peaceful. He passed away in his sleep one autumn evening, curled up on Tommy's blanket. Margaret found him the next morning, looking serene, as if he had simply decided it was time to go on another journey. The Millers came to the small ceremony in Margaret's garden, where they buried Max beneath the apple tree where he and Tommy used to play. Mrs. Miller brought a hand-painted stone bearing both their names, Max and Tommy, friends forever. The local paper ran one final story about Max, titled A Faithful Friend's Last Journey, celebrating his life and the ripples of love and healing he had created in their community. That night, as Margaret sat in her favorite chair, she didn't feel the usual ache of loss. Instead, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Max had taught her about a love that knew no boundaries, a faithfulness that transcended understanding, and a connection that even death couldn't sever. Years passed, but Max's story continued to touch lives. The therapy dog program, now known throughout New England as one of the most successful of its kind, kept growing. Margaret's granddaughter Sarah, inspired by Max's story, went on to study veterinary medicine, specializing in animal behavior and the human-animal bond. Her doctoral thesis, dedicated to Max and Tommy, explored the growing scientific understanding of dogs' emotional intelligence and their ability to sense illness and emotional distress. The apple tree in Margaret's garden grew tall and strong, its branches spreading wide over the spot where Max rested. Every spring, it bloomed with pink and white flowers, a reminder of new beginnings and the endless cycle of love and life. Children from the neighborhood would often stop to hear the story of the faithful dog who made one last journey to say goodbye to his friend. And in their wide-eyed wonder, Margaret saw the legacy of Max's love living on. Local schools began incorporating Max's story into their character education programs, teaching children about empathy, loyalty, and the profound connections possible between all living beings. The hospital's therapy dog program became a model for similar programs across the country, with Tommy's Angels chapters opening in pediatric wards nationwide. Margaret kept Tommy's blanket carefully preserved in a cedar chest, along with Max's collar and the photographs that told their story. On quiet evenings, she would sometimes take them out, remembering the dog who had been so much more than a pet. He had been a teacher, a healer, and a friend who showed her that love sometimes takes us on unexpected journeys, but always leads us home. As the years passed, Margaret became known as the keeper of Max's story. She would often sit in her garden, surrounded by the flowers she and Robert had planted together, sharing the tale with anyone who asked. Young families moving into the neighborhood would hear about the faithful golden retriever from their children, who learned the story at school, and would make their way to Margaret's house to hear it firsthand. The impact of Max's final journey continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. Dr. Martinez, inspired by the events, began collaborating with researchers at Boston University to study the ways dogs detect and respond to human illness and emotional needs. Their findings, published in several prestigious medical journals, helped bridge the gap between anecdotal evidence and scientific understanding of the human-animal bond. Sarah's veterinary career flourished, shaped by her early experiences with Max. She became a leading expert in animal-assisted therapy, traveling the country to help hospitals establish their own programs. In her presentations, she always began with Max's story, using it to illustrate the extraordinary capacity of animals to connect with and heal human hearts. "My grandfather gave Max to my grandmother as their last anniversary gift," she would tell her audiences. But really, Max was a gift to our entire community. He showed us that love doesn't always make sense to our logical minds, but it always makes sense to our hearts. The Miller family remained closely connected to Max's legacy. Tommy's younger sister Emma, who had been just a toddler when her brother was sick, grew up to become a pediatric oncologist. She worked at the same hospital where the therapy dog program had started, and made sure every young patient had the opportunity to experience the healing presence of a gentle dog during their treatment. "I don't really remember my brother," she once told Margaret during a visit. "But through Max's story, I feel like I know his heart. The way he connected with Max, the comfort he found in that friendship. It helps me understand what my patients need. Sometimes the best medicine isn't medicine at all. It's the unconditional love of a dog who sees past the illness to the person inside." The apple tree in Margaret's garden became a sort of unofficial memorial, not just to Max and Tommy, but to all the special bonds between humans and their animal companions. People would leave small tokens there: dog treats, tennis balls, handmade cards from children touched by the story. Margaret would collect them each evening, donating the treats to local animal shelters and keeping the cards in a special album. On the 10th anniversary of Max's passing, the town of Millbrook held a special ceremony to dedicate a new wing of the local animal shelter. Named the Max and Tommy Memorial Wing, it specialized in helping elderly and special needs dogs find loving homes. The wing featured a mural depicting Max and Tommy in the garden, surrounded by apple blossoms, painted by local artists working from the photographs Margaret had shared. Laura and her family had moved back to Millbrook by then, wanting to be closer to Margaret as she aged. They bought a house just a few blocks away, and Laura's youngest daughter, Katie, would often spend afternoons with her grandmother in the garden, asking to hear Max's story just one more time. "But Grandma," Katie would ask, her young face serious, "how did Max know about Tommy? How did he find him?" Margaret would smile, running her fingers over Max's worn collar. "Some things, sweetheart, we're not meant to fully understand. Love has its own wisdom, its own way of knowing. Max taught me that sometimes the heart knows things that the mind can't explain." The therapy dog program that had grown from Max's story continued to evolve and expand. By its 15th year, Tommy's Angels had chapters in over 50 hospitals across the country. Each chapter maintained a wall of honor featuring the original photograph of Max and Tommy in the garden, along with pictures of the local therapy dogs and the children they helped. The program's success led to groundbreaking research in the field of animal-assisted therapy. Scientists documented remarkable improvements in patients who received regular visits from therapy dogs, lower stress levels, reduced pain perception, improved immune response, and faster recovery times. But perhaps more importantly, they recorded countless stories of hope, comfort, and healing that couldn't be measured by medical instruments. Margaret lived to see her 90th birthday, celebrated in the garden under the apple tree's spreading branches. By then, she needed a walker to get around, but her mind remained sharp, especially when it came to sharing Max's story. The party brought together 4 generations of her family, along with many of the people whose lives had been touched by Max's journey. The Millers were there, now with grandchildren of their own. Tommy's mother brought a scrapbook she'd been keeping filled with letters and photos from families whose children had been helped by the therapy dog program that bore her son's name. "Sometimes," she told Margaret, "I think Tommy and Max knew exactly what they were doing. Their friendship didn't end when Tommy died. It just took on a different form, touching more lives than we could have imagined." Dr. Martinez, now retired but still actively involved in animal-assisted therapy research, gave a speech about the scientific legacy of Max's journey. What started as a mystery, a dog's inexplicable disappearance, helped us understand something profound about the capacity of animals to sense and respond to human needs. Max's story bridges the gap between science and spirit, showing us that there's still so much to learn about the bonds between humans and animals. As twilight fell on the party, Margaret sat in her favorite garden chair, watching her great-grandchildren play near the apple tree. A therapy dog from the local program, a gentle golden retriever named Hope, lay at her feet, occasionally lifting her head to accept pats from passing children. "You know," Margaret told the gathered family, "people often ask me if I'm sad that Max left that day, if I wish I'd known where he was going. But I've come to understand that he was exactly where he needed to be. Love led him there, just as love leads all of us to where we need to be, if we're brave enough to follow it." The story of Max and Tommy became more than just a tale of a dog's mysterious journey. It became a testament to the extraordinary bonds that connect all living beings, a reminder that love knows no boundaries and that sometimes, the most profound acts of loyalty come from the purest of hearts. And in that small New England town, beneath an apple tree in a quiet garden, the legacy of a faithful old dog and the boy he loved continues to grow, touching hearts and reminding us all that sometimes, the most extraordinary love stories are the ones that leave us in tears, not just of sadness, but of wonder at the profound mysteries of the heart. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep a few years later, on a spring night when the apple tree was in full bloom. They found her in her favorite chair, Max's collar in her hands and a gentle smile on her face. The local paper's obituary described her as the guardian of a story that changed countless lives. But to those who knew her, she was simply someone who understood that love, in all its forms, was the greatest gift we could give or receive. Today, the apple tree still stands in what is now a community garden, dedicated to the memory of Max, Tommy, and Margaret. The therapy dog program they inspired continues to grow, bringing comfort and healing to new generations. And their story lives on, a testament to the extraordinary capacity of the heart to love, to heal, and to find its way home, no matter how far the journey may lead. For in the end, Max's disappearance hadn't just been about saying goodbye to Tommy. It had been about showing everyone who heard his story that love, in its truest form, transcends all understanding. It reaches across time and space, guides us home when we're lost, and lives on in the hearts of those we leave behind. And sometimes, just sometimes, it takes the form of a faithful old dog who knows exactly where he needs to be, even when no one else understands why.